Hey dev team, welcome back to Flutter with Drag. In this episode we're going to start dealing with the data a little bit more. At the moment we have a quiz model and we've just got a quiz hard-coded, a number of quizzes hard-coded into that file, and that's not sensible. Going forward we need to do something about it. So we need to convert this. Let's start again. I'm going to store this as JSON data. I'm going to do that for a number of reasons. One, it's a decent file format really, or a different format to store it and process it from. And secondly, I envisage that our app can be updated over the internet at some point, and JSON is a nice way of shipping that across the old internet. It just makes sense. So the very first part of this episode, I'm going to convert our current quiz data into a JSON document. Now I did think about doing this offline and just saying, hey, here it is, but it is part of the development process, so I am going to do it recorded. However, if you don't want to follow along with this, then I will, if I remember, leave a timestamp just about here, and that is where you need to skip to, where we actually then start processing it. And you could download the quiz data from the Github repository. Okay, I've just got to remember to do that. So what I'm going to do is in the libs, not even in the libs folder, in our main folder, I'm going to create a new folder called assets. And in that folder, I'm going to create a new file called quiz.json. And then from our quiz model, I'm just going to take the first quiz from there. You know what? We'll take them all. I'm going to take all the quizzes. So yeah, let's do this from the top. I'm going to take from this square bracket at the top, this list, all the way down to the last square bracket at the bottom, and paste that into our quiz JSON. Okay, so we need to convert this now to a JSON document, which is in the same format. And the way we're going to do that is by using search and replace. And so working down from the top, I'm going to do an edit, replace, or Control H. We're going to search for quiz, and we're going to replace it with a curly bracket. In fact, let me be clear, we're searching for quiz, open bracket, and replacing it with a curly bracket, and we're going to hit replace all. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is search for name colon and replace that with name colon, but name in double speech marks. We'll replace all. And then we're going to do the same for ID. So ID colon, we're going to put into ID with speech marks, replace all, and we're going to do that for all the fields we've got. So I'm just going to do that description, questions, and then question bracket, I'll come back to in a sec. Let's just keep going with this one at the moment. So text and text. Choices and choices. Answer we'll come back to in a second. Correct and correct. And feedback and feedback. I think that's all of those. Yeah. Okay, so question open bracket, answer curly bracket, sorry, answer open bracket is going to become curly bracket, replace all. And let's have a look, what else do we need to do? Yeah, anywhere we've got a close bracket and a comma needs to become a closed curly bracket and a comma, replace all. And then all our single speech marks need to become double speech marks. And I think that's it. So we can now go through this and just make sure it's got everything right. Some of the commas are going to be in red because we don't need a trailing comma, so we just need to delete those. That will be basically at the end of all the lists. So that will just take a second to clean up. I missed some up here. And here and here. Here and here. Here, here. Here, here, there, there. That bracket should be a curly bracket. It's just it didn't have a comma after it before. And I think that is it. Now, to be absolutely sure, we just need to Control-Shift-P and go to type in Json prettifier JSON, and if that's worked, it means that's all correct. Now, the only thing to watch out for is if you had any apostrophes in the text. So, for example, under the feedback, you might have had previously, you might have had something like it's. If you had that, then that would have just been changed to a quote like that. And if that's the case, you just need to correct those ones by hand. Okay, but other than that, I think that's good. And we now have, I'm going to save that, we now have a JSON file that we can use instead of our model file. Okay, so I'm just going to, well, we've got that saved. I'm going to just pause here while I get my emulators and everything booted back up, and we will continue. Okay, so we have our quiz.json, and we will come back to that in a little while. So, in fact, we can close all of this down and start today. So our next problem is with our models. We have these answer model, question model, and quiz model. And within these models, we need a way of converting to and from JSON. Less to JSON. I don't think there's going to be a need for us to convert to JSON, but we'll certainly need to convert from JSON. Thankfully, this can be easily accomplished with one of the extensions we installed right back at episode 1, and simply clicking within our model and hitting Control Dot, we can go to Generate Json Serialization, and that will put the code in that we need to convert our stuff, and we'll be using the maps mostly, which is going to help immensely. It saves a lot of typing. Now, that's our answer. We need to do the same for the quiz. So generate JSON serialization. And, sorry, that's the question. And we need to do the same for the quiz as well. not inside the factory, click outside the factory, click generate JSON serialization, and that will take care of all of that for us. Now we could write all that out by hand, more than welcome to. This is quicker. Let's just save all those. We'll get a few errors while we're saving because they depend on each other. So the quiz, for example, uses the to map in the questions, and the questions uses the to map in the answer. So until they're all saved, we'll get a few errors, but there we go. So that's good. Now the next step is to think about how we're going to store our data within our app, how we're going to persist it, because I don't want to be loading up JSON every time and reading it. I just want to use the JSON for two purposes. First of all, when we want to update our app, we're going to put a new version of our JSON file on a web server somewhere, and our app will go along and get that. And the other reason is when our app very first starts for the very first time, it's possible that there is going to be no internet connection for the user. And so I'm going to include the latest version of our quiz JSON within the app, and it can use that for getting some questions, so at least they don't have a completely empty set of questions, an empty app. So I'm going to use something called Hive, which is a wonderful little database, persistent storage in Flutter, and it's blazingly fast. It's very fast, and for us dealing with just text, essentially, it's going to be more than adequate for storing our data and getting fast retrieval. So let's install that. Control-Shift-P, add update dependencies, and we just need to add Hive _ Flutter. Give that a second to update. And I will open up, as soon as that's done, I will open up my pubspec.yaml, and you'll see we now have this Hive Flutter installed. We're also going to need a couple of developer dependencies. So Control-Shift again, Control-Shift-P again, and add update dev dependencies. And we're going to want build _ runner and Hive _ generator. Hit enter on those, and those two dependencies will be brought in just like so. Save that file, and we should get our packages coming down, and we're good to go. Okay, so Hive, how does it work? Well, let's come back to our main.dart page, because we need to do some initialization. It doesn't work straight out off the bat. We have to initialize it, and this is the place we're going to do that. So I'm going to turn our main into an asynchronous function, because it does take a while for Hive to initialize. And when I say a while, I'm talking microseconds, but it's not instant, so we have to be doing this asynchronously. So we're going to await Hive dot, and let's import that, Hive.flutter, Hive _.flutter. So Hive dot initialize init flutter. Okay, and that will take care of that. Now what we need to do is make an adapter for all of our models. So let's come back to our models, and we'll start with our quiz model, and we have to turn this into a Hive adapter. Thankfully, that's very easy. What we're going to do is, in our quiz model, we're going to type in part quiz underscore model dot g dot dart. Okay, now what does that mean? If you've not used part before, it basically means this file is going to be part of this file. It's almost importing it in and using it here, but that's essentially what it does. Now, where is this quiz model file? Well, it doesn't exist yet, and the good news is we don't even have to create it. The .g is a convention, it just means generated. So this is going to get generated for us based on some annotations that we're going to give this. So what are these annotations? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to say here Hive type, and we're going to give it an ID, and I'm going to give it an ID of 1. Now, every model that we're going to store in the Hive has to have a type ID, and it has to be unique. So we have to remember we can't use Hive type 1 anywhere else within the app. We also have to tell it about all the fields, and that's as easy as doing Hive field and also giving it a unique number. So we're going to give our name, our ID, our description, and our questions a unique field number, and that's all we have to do. The rest of it will be generated for us. We need to do that for all of our models because questions is going to be stored, and so that needs to be a Hive type as well, a Hive adapter as well. So come to questions, Hive type. Well, we've used 1, so this is going to be a Hive type 2, and we need a field for these. Now the fields don't need to be unique across the app. The field IDs need to be unique within the type. So the type ID has to be unique across the app, and the Hive fields has to be unique across the model. Okay. We also need to here put our part in, and the part for this one is going to be question model .g .dart. Save that one, and then our answer model, exactly the same. We're going to be putting in a Hive type. So we've used 1, 2, so this is going to be 3, and each of our fields, each of our properties are going to have a unique ID. Again, once more, part answer model .g .dart. Okay, now we just need to come to our terminal and run a command, and we type in Flutter packages pub run build runner build, and give that a second. And as that goes through, it'll take a moment, but if you watch our file list here, you will see, hopefully, that those files will get automatically created. Bingo, look at that. Okay, we've got an error here with our quiz. I wonder if that's simply because I forgot to save it. I think it was. So I'll just save it and run that command again. And that time it saved perfectly for us. So all these files with all this code in has been created for us, and our adapters are ready to go. So with that, we can come back to our main.dart And we now need to register all these adapters that we've got, the quiz adapter, the question adapter, and the answer adapter. And I don't really want to do it here because I think we should keep the code sort of related to the quiz repository, because this is what this is becoming, a quiz repository. We need to keep it all contained. So I'm going to do that within the quiz repository. So coming to the quiz repository, what we need to do is now change this up a little bit in such a way that we can create the adapters or register the adapters, but also open the box. What is a box? Hives are stored in boxes. So we're going to have a quiz box, a Hive, quiz Hive, where our quizzes are going to be stored. We need to open that before we can use it. And to open it, it returns a future. It's not something that can happen straight away. So we can't do that in our constructor. So let's think about this in our quiz repository. If we were to create a constructor, we could register the adapters here, but we can't open the box. And we need to open the box, and we also need to have access to the box. So we're going to have a final box, which is a Hive box, and we'll call that box. And we're going to be using that in a number of places. So in order to register that box, we need to pass the box into our constructor, and we need to require it. So we can do required box. But where are we getting this box from? Well, before we get to that point, let's just register it. Box equals box. So on our initializer, we have our box equaling our private box equaling the box that we've passed in, or the reference to that box. Okay, so we can't use the constructor. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a static future that returns a quiz repository. And we're going to basically generate or create our quiz repository within our own quiz repository and pass it back to itself. Let me explain. We're going to call this create. And this can be an async function. But because it's a static function, we can't access our private box. So if we try to access box here and make it equal something, we will get the message telling us can't be used because it's final, blah, 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 and all sorts of stuff. Okay, so that's not the way to do it. What we need to do is create the box. And we do that by putting box equals await Hive open box, and we're going to call this box our quiz box. That can be any sensible string that you want. We can then return our quiz repository with that box. I've missed off an equal sign. That was silly. Okay, wonder what that was about. So we're creating our box here and returning our quiz repository. But we want to make sure, if we come back to Dart, we want to make sure that this can never be called without the create. And so the way we do that is we take our constructor here and we make it private. So now our constructor can only be called from within our own class. So coming back to Dart, we can't call quiz repository. It says it doesn't have an unnamed constructor. But what we can do is call create. However, this is an async function and this isn't going to wait for an async function. So what we need to do is create it outside. And because this is a stateless widget and I don't want to make it a stateful widget, I'm actually going to create it all the way up here. And I'm going to create a quiz repository, which I'm just going to call QR. And that is going to equal our quiz repository dot create. And we're going to await it here. We're then going to pass that to our stateless widget. So we're going to have in our stateless widget a final quiz repository, which we'll call again QR. And we will require that for our app. And so within, when we call our app, we can pass in our quiz repository. And now this can't be a constant anymore. That comes out. So we're awaiting the initialization of the Hive. We're calling our quiz repository, or creating an instance of our quiz repository using this create static method. We're then passing that to my app. And then we will use that here in our provider. We will just pass in the quiz repository there. This create static method is waiting for a box to be opened, passing the box to our quiz repository here, and that's setting it as the final quiz repository. So later on in any of our functions down here, any of our methods, we can call box and do something with it. However, we also need to, in this area, register our adapters. So we've got 3 adapters, and we're going to do that with hive.register adapter. We're going to register the quiz adapter. And remember, this has been made for us. So if we come up to our quiz model.dart, you can see that this class adapter has been made for us. So we're going to register the quiz adapter. I'm going to copy that down. We're going to register the question adapter, and we're going to register the answer adapter. Not quite sure why the autocompletion's not working there, but there we go. So that is our Hive sorted out. I'm just going to save that. We've got a hot reload. Everything's working. Now we need to do something with it. So for this next part, because we're going to be playing with this Hive and things, I'm actually going to come back to our main, and in our home page, let's come back to our home page, sorry, in our scaffold and our app bar, I'm going to create some actions, and one of the actions, or the action I'm going to create, is an elevated button which just has the text dev, and on pressed is going to be a function that just creates or opens a new page for us. So we're going to put navigator dot push context root material page root, and the builder is going to be a page called dev page, which doesn't exist yet. I'm going to come down here, and this is really only a temporary page for development. I'm going to create a class called dev page, and the dev page is going to return a scaffold. We'll stick an app bar in with a title, text, dev, and body is going to be a column. It's not going to be pretty at all, with a load of children in. Let's save that and that and refresh our app. Okay, so that gives us a dev button, which will take us to a page which will just have some development functions on there for us for now. So one of those functions is going to be an elevated button, again, which we will come to in a second, but this one is going to be called load data into Hive. And we're going to be able to come here and click on that to load our initial data into our Hive. So to do that, we're going to need a method to do that. And so we'll create that within our repository. So we're going to create a function called store data. And this is going to be an asynchronous function. And as a result, it's going to return a future void. So what do we want to do? Well, we now have this quiz JSON that we have created, and we're going to need to access that and open it. Because I'm going to have to change my pubspec.yaml, I'm going to stop my emulator for a second, come down to my pubspec.yaml, and under assets, I'm going to uncomment that and just load in everything in the assets directory. That should do a pub get. Let that run for a second, and then rerun the app. Now while that's booting up, we can write this code. So what we're going to do first of all is we're going to load in the JSON data from our bundle, and we can do that by using root bundle load string and put in the key, and the key is going to be assets quiz.json. Okay, we then want to decode that because it's JSON already, and we can do that with JSON decode. That takes in a string, and we get our string by awaiting the return of this. Now JSON decode needs to have the Dart convert library, so I've just imported the Dart convert library. So if we now print the JSON, we should be able to see that output. So let's come back to our home page and our elevated button here, and on pressed we're going to put in context.read our quiz repository, and we're going to call the stored data method. Save that. So now when we come to our dev page and we click load data into Hive, we should get a printout of the JSON. So we have an array. We can see that this starts with a square bracket, which means it's an array, and then we have a map. You'll notice from the JSON everything had speech marks around it. That's gone because it's now mapped as a string dynamic. So we can take that map, and for each of the things in it, which it doesn't know what it is, we know it's a quiz, but our program doesn't know it's a quiz, we need to convert it into a quiz. So we can do that. Instead of printing it, we can say for var data in our JSON, i.e. for each of the elements within our JSON, we're going to make a quiz. And we can make a quiz equals quiz from map, and the data is the map that we're putting in. And now we want to store that in the Hive, and we can do that with box put, and we need to give it a key. Well, the sensible key will be the quiz ID, the unique ID we've given it, and that way we know that we can get a particular ID and store it. So quiz ID is going to be the key, and the value is going to be the quiz. Okay, let's save that and then click the button. In fact, what I'm going to do before I click the button is I'm also going to print out here the quiz.name so we can see that happen within our output. So I'm going to click now the load data into Hive, and you can see that general knowledge 1, general knowledge 2 and general knowledge 3 have been processed. Okay, now within our repository we can create a couple more functions. We can create a list of quiz, not quiz repository, and we can call this load quiz list, and that is going to return box.values. We need to cast it to a quiz because the box doesn't really know what it is, it's just some objects, and convert that to a list. We can also get an individual quiz because we need to do that for some of our pages. Quiz, get quiz. We need to pass in a string key, and we're going to return a box get key. Now we also need to return, for safety reasons, a default quiz, and we haven't got a default quiz model, so I'm going to come back to our quiz model. Oh, we did create it. Oh, that's fine, I forgot we created that. Well, that saves us doing that. So we're going to return our key, and the default is going to be default value is going to be our quiz.empty. So if we give it an invalid key, what's going to be returned is the empty value of the quiz. So now we need to come back to our quiz model, and we need to comment out this data that we've got in here, this quiz data, because we no longer want to be accessing that. So when we save that, we'll get some errors because within our program we are looking in a couple of places for that data. We don't need these now, so we're getting all these quizzes. Let's comment those out as well and follow our errors. So we're going to our quiz page now, where the quiz repository get quiz by ID no longer exists. So we're going to say get quiz and pass in the quiz ID. And on our home page, where we get a list of all our quizzes, well, we're no longer doing that, we're just going to put load quiz list there. So if we do a full reset of our app now, we should still have our quizzes, and the quizzes should still work, which they seem to do. Yep, but the data is now coming from our Hive. Okay, that's been quite a lot in this episode. I don't know about you, but my brain's hurting. In the next episode, we will continue with this Hive, and we will continue propagating our data throughout it and increasing the stability and usability of our app, including the ability to update the quiz over the internet. So folks, if you've enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It does help me out. And we'll see you next time. Until then, take care. Thanks for watching. Bye now.